Testing, 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 testing. It's a little quiet. So in this video, I wanted to talk about something I've noticed that has been plaguing a lot of sci-fi television. I also wanted to talk about its relation to sci-fi movies. And since Netflix is coming out with the Three-Body Problem soon, and since that book series itself has been pretty polarizing, I thought it'd be a good time to talk about it. For those of you who have not read the books, the main argument against the book series is that it's not great when it comes to its characterization and that it focuses too much on its technology and ideas. This is not something I found difficult to surpass. I love Cixin Liu's perspective. He's a Chinese writer, so his perspective of the Cultural Revolution is very unique to me, and I read science fiction for the techno jargon and the strange ideas. That fact has divided a lot of readers, and obviously you can tell what side I'm on. I feel that Netflix is going to remove all the unique aspects of the show, all the cool concepts that is the reason why I read the series in the first place, so that it's more digestible for a general audience. But before we get into that and the other shows that I want to talk about that I feel have fallen prey to this, let's get some context on what science fiction is. The typical answer you will get when you ask people what is sci-fi is something about space, time travel, or some new technology that changes human life. And that's pretty close to the definition. Wikipedia gives science fiction the definition as a genre of speculative fiction which typically deals with imaginative and futuristic concepts such as advanced science, technology, space exploration, time travel, parallel universes, and extraterrestrial life. Isaac Asimov, one of the big three sci-fi writers, describes it as that branch of literature which deals with the reaction of human beings to changes in science and technology. As you can see from those two quotes, that gives a very general idea of what science fiction is, definitely different from the typical answer, and it basically says that science fiction is anything that answers the question, what if? That pins The Twilight Zone, The Walking Dead, and Futurama within the same genre. Isaac Asimov's definition is a little bit more specific because it mentions technology or science, but any writer with any marks could easily write something about how a technology invented the virus or how technology invented a parallel universe, and so that throws anything and everything back into the box of science fiction. But I think it's more important to talk about the goal of science fiction. I feel science fiction deals with ideas and concepts that affect humanity's future. The name itself could be better described as speculative fiction instead of sci-fi, and has been interchangeably used with writers in the past. In genres like fantasy, the goal isn't necessarily to talk about science or technology or even the future of humanity, but often it uses its metaphor magic or the fantasy setting itself to commentate on human nature or just to give the audience a level of escapism. Not that fantasy can't talk about human nature, but generally speaking, and I mean very generally, it is not focused on the future or technology. Horror is another example. The main goal of that genre is to scare you, to creep you out. While often there is a scientific element or some kind of new technology that can work in conjunction with it, its main goal is to scare you. And so I feel sci-fi can be best described as a bridge between genres to help authors and writers and filmmakers to write the stories that they need. This way they can use any genre, any setting to fully explore the world or ideas that they're trying to explain. The two branches of sci-fi, the more traditional can be great, as in examples when it comes to Interstellar or Westworld, but also works when it's mixed with other genres like Star Wars or The Man in the High Castle. So when it comes to television and film, science fiction has been there right at the beginning. The creation of film itself could be an idea that an author could use in their sci-fi novel. But for the purpose of this video, I want to talk about why movies get usually a more traditional sci-fi setting or ideas, and TV shows lean towards more of the speculative. Well, for one thing, it has to do with budget. To have gigantic spaceships or CGI aliens or time travel costs a lot of money, and until recently, TV shows just did not have the budget to make the practical and special effects. Blade Runner 2049 took about $185 million to make, and Game of Thrones, the last season, was one of the most expensive seasons of television and was only at $90 million. Sitcoms and other dramas are much less, especially when they're not extremely popular. Very few shows before 2010 had anywhere near budgets that were higher than $15 million per episode. Almost all the most expensive TV series are from the last 10 years, and the few that aren't are mainly for the cast members like in Friends or Band of Brothers in the Pacific, 2 miniseries that were about war with closed budgets and no plan to continue into multiple seasons. So most TV before 2010 was more focused on low budget shows that can continue to go on and on with a very little money as possible, where movies tend to put more in but expect a larger payout. Film has the opportunity and budget to take risks on the more larger scale stories that traditional sci-fi tells. And so many TV shows that fall under the umbrella of sci-fi tend to lead more into speculative fiction than traditional because they are cheaper to produce. The Twilight Zone was able to get away with only 50 to 70,000 per episode depending on which season, because most of the episodes were about one or a few individuals in settings that were easy to film and ideas that didn't require heavy special effects, though sometimes they should have used it. Secondly, I think it has to do with length. Sci-fi often only talks about one concept or idea or technology, and that's it. What if I could travel through time? What if I could enter a person's dreams? And what if I could become a gigantic baby? Ignore that last one. And these ideas work best in a short but highly concentrated period of time. Movies like The Martian are able to show us all the major emotional events within its 2.5-hour runtime with nothing else besides the premise. For a show to do the same exact thing but 5 to 10 times longer would be difficult without adding any new ideas or characters to keep the attention of the audience. On the other hand, I feel a zombie apocalypse story works better in a TV setting because we want to see those little moments, those little changes in morality, little changes in lifestyle that shape and change our characters. And that's why The Walking Dead was so good. Until it wasn't. Or something like Dark, which is able to mix its sci-fi elements with its mystery set in a small town. So stories like these work better generally in a TV runtime, where more ideas, more stories, more character arcs are able to be properly explored. These are the two main reasons that I could think of, and there's probably more, but let's get into the meat of things now. While movies are still stuck in their superhero phase, though that looks to be on the decline due to the success of Dune and Godzilla Minus One, there seems to be a surge of new sci-fi in television. Stranger Things is a show that everyone and their mother knows about. Black Mirror is just the Twilight Zone of our time. And there's a large list of other shows that fall into sci-fi and other genres that are great. The Expanse is a good example. I haven't seen it, but judging by general audiences and critics' reactions, which are both overwhelmingly positive, which is a rare case in itself. I wonder why it got canceled. But out of the things that I have seen that I also think fall into a more traditional sci-fi setting, I want to talk about Silo and Foundation. Both of these shows were made by Apple TV, so there's a possibility that all these problems stem from this studio specifically, but these are the only shows where I have read the books and I feel fall more into traditional sci-fi. Alien, space, new technology that changes history, etc. Let's start with Foundation was originally written by Isaac Asimov, the guy who I quoted earlier, and was released in 1951. The main idea and concept of the book series is psychohistory. A scientist, Harry Seldon, has used math to be able to calculate the movement of mass groups of people and predict what the future holds on a galactic scale. The premise basically says that on the long timeline of history, individuals and individual actions do not overcome the needs or wants of the masses. So many of the stories in the books, which jump across centuries, show the power of society as a whole, how things like religion, economy, and science determine the outcome of millions and not the leaders or individual people that live in that time. It was a conscious decision by Asimov to play off what sci-fi was at the time, which was mainly stories about how one individual could punch, shoot, or fight his way out of any problem and save the world through his own will. In Foundation, each story ends with a clever anti-climax, where at the end, Harry Seldon or another character explains how this or that event led to this outcome long before anyone did anything. I like this idea, and it's really refreshing to see something that's so different from the usual hero story that we're told, and I recommend anyone to read the books for themselves. But how well did the show handle this idea?
Harry said an entire galaxy can pivot around the actions of an individual.
So then you were one of those individuals, right?
So the show basically abandons this idea, and in fact it inverts it to mean the complete opposite. While I felt the first episode was very close to the plot of the book, almost everything after this is not the same besides character names or locations. While I have other problems with the show as a whole, poor character arcs, pointless action scenes, and a plot that is both impossible to enjoy and unnecessarily complex, the main issue is the fact that they abandon the original purpose of the books. It wants to be a show about how individuals decide the fate of the world and how whole groups of people can be swayed by the actions of a few strong-willed. This in itself is not a bad idea, but it's not Asimov, and it's not Foundation. The show also does something I like to call concept creep. I'm pretty sure someone else has already named, but this is my idea of it. Concept creep is when a story starts adding more and more technology, ideas, abilities, or anything that changes how characters interact with the story without considering how it changes the themes, plot, or ideas. Concept creep often occurs when the writers need a plot device to get the characters or stories somewhere else, but since they wrote themselves into a corner, they need to invent something new to help move things along. Or in the case of Foundation, they have a huge hammer full of ideas that they never fit together and then quickly abandon it for another huge hammer of ideas. There's cloning, cryosleep, force fields, space people, hovercrafts, robots, precognition, past cognition, consciousness transferring, consciousness cloning, AI, teleportation, mind control, giant warships, space racism, special bloodlines, Lee Pace punching things, planetary travel, galactic religion, environmentalism, royal politics, and of course, the bastardized version of psychohistory that has to share screen time with all these other concepts, and 24 that I didn't feel like listing. The show jumps from one of these concepts to another without ever making the audience feel the connection between these ideas and our characters. Gale spends both seasons being pushed around and doing nothing. She never gets moments that show her personality, wants, or strengths. Harry Seldon is kept around to explain random things and to Deus Ex Machina any plot problems. Salvor Harding has to be the most annoying character on the show. The most redeeming character in this story has to be Brother Day. He has the most interesting storyline about self-exploration and the only part of season 1 that I actually enjoyed, which they threw out the window in season 2 to turn him into a cartoonish villain. The structure of the seasons is also really strange. Each season is dedicated to one crisis, and the original book has 4 crisis events. And seeing how they were originally published as short stories within a magazine called Astounding Science Fiction, there is not enough in them to merit a whole season. If they keep going at this pace, it's going to take 7 or more seasons for them to cover their original trilogy, which is crazy because there's still 4 more books after that if they want to cover those, which I don't think they'll get to. I don't see why season 1 wasn't dedicated to the whole first book. Episode 1 could pretty much stay the same, but instead of dragging a short story along for 9 episodes, they could have dedicated 2 or 3 episodes to each following crisis. And if they wanted to change anything, they could have just changed how some of these stories ended. It was written in 1951, so some of the technology could use an update if they felt like changing anything. This would prevent all the concept creep that is just littered in this show, and also I feel like it would give the show a unique premise and a much faster pace. There are a lot of shows that are episodic, and there are a lot of shows that have one narrative throughout, but I can't think of many examples where it's episodic with a narrative overarching it the whole time, which I think would have been cool. Last thing I want to mention before I start making fun of Silo is the fact that Foundation for some reason needs to throw in random vulgarity. For example, this is from episode 1. This is one of the first things one of the characters tells us in the show.
You go first and put your marker past the rock. I'll let you touch my Gia.
For 1 minute.
10 seconds. Or you can look at them both for 30.
Yeah, not sure what that has to do with psychohistory. One of the most famous lines in the book is, "Violence is the last refuge of the incompetent." So the showrunners made the main character of season 1 an action hero. Now, I'm not against vulgar speech or action. Many of the shows and films that I love have this exact element, but unlike in Foundation, they have a place and purpose. John Wick is an action series that speaks on revenge and the length a man will go to get it. It's brutal, it's exciting, and at times it's funny, because the movies are directly speaking on and adding to the conversation of what violence, revenge, and justice are. The John Wick films are not deep at all, but its action has an art to it, and its story and themes are directly dependent on how the the audience perceives its action. Breaking Bad has a lot of vulgar language, and it is used to emphasize the rawness of the criminal world and grounds it in reality. It shows character growth or regression and has a contrast to the characters that don't speak like that. So why does Foundation throw in these random vulgar moments or these random action scenes? And I think it stems back to Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones, especially in the earlier seasons, was known for its vulgarity and for its brutal action. But on top of that, I would also say the show wants to be Star Wars, which is why some of the action is not as brutal. But in its attempt to become some kind of mixture of Game of Thrones and Star Wars, it becomes nothing. It wants to be a super edgy, epic space battle for adults, and it ends up not doing anything well, and I feel like it misses the purpose of those parts of those other shows. It seems like the writers of this show wanted to write anything besides an Asimov story. But let's get into... Silo is a book series written by Hugh Howey in 2011 that also started as a bunch of short stories that eventually became a full novel. This series covers the story of a community of people stuck in a huge silo underground. They have been down there for so long no one knows the world before the silo, and many of them believe that the silo is the whole world. The first book that the show is based off tells the story of how lies are used to control outcomes and that systems can exist to oppress people and the truth. Our main character, Juliet, learns about the truth of the world and tries to do something about it. While I feel Foundation completely abandons the author's main premise, Silo keeps it to the novel's main ideas fairly well. What I don't like is how long it takes to get there and the delivery of character moments. There's some concept creep with a few things like a weird disease that feels so random and a secret organization of people called the Flame Keepers, which has to be the lamest name I've ever heard. And they add random character arcs, especially with Juliet's father, that I don't feel had enough time to mean anything. The show cuts the book in half for season 1 and decides to drag the story to a near stop in the middle of the season. Just like in Foundation, I liked the first episode a lot and its setup made me really excited for the rest of the season. Unlike Foundation though, where they put so much that it becomes overwhelmingly muddy, Silo is shocking because of how much they don't put into it. They abandon a lot of characters to fill the time with other things. For example, Juliet and Lucas develop a relationship in the books, and Lucas is a strong part of what opens Juliet's mind to the outside world. Juliet spent a lot of time in the lower parts of the silo and never really had time to think of the outside, and Lucas helped build that in her. In the show, they get like one scene and the actors just have zero chemistry. It's the most forced relationship I've probably ever seen in a show, at least in like the last 5 years. It was not done well.
Technically, I still have 1 minute left before the cafeteria closes.
Okay.
The dialogue here is also very weak. TV shows can't say everything in the books because most of the time it's in the character's head. So a show has to carefully place dialogue to give us a higher understanding of the mindset of our characters. Instead of doing that, the show just has the characters curse all the time. Most of these scenes feel like poorly done improv, and I genuinely feel bad for Rebecca Ferguson because I know she can act. She does an amazing job in the Dune films, but she is given nothing here. There's one scene with so much cursing, it's almost hilarious. The same point stands that I said in the Foundation section. These shows want to be Game of Star Wars and want to be gritty and realistic, and I think that they missed the point of those shows, but the main thing that kills Silo is Juliet's character. I love her in the books. She's confident, smart, a good leader, and most importantly, a good and likable person. When she's faced with a problem, you are right there with her, rooting and hoping she succeeds. The show completely ignores this part of her character and made me hate her. In episode 2, she wakes up hungover, late for work, and then punches her understudy for trying to help.
Come on. You're late.
She's constantly antagonizing people, trying to help her, and has a general hatred for everything. In the books, Juliet is characterized by her love for helping people, and that does not appear in the show. The story changes, vulgar language, and maybe even the pacing can be ignored if you like the main character enough, but they didn't accomplish that. Instead, they had this guy kill a dude and this guy standing around cursing. Unlike Foundation, Silo spends its time doing nothing, which is a real shame because there are small details that I like. The race up to the stairs shows the culture of the the silo, and many of the costumes and decorations around the silo emphasize its people and their lifestyle. They easily could have made the show a lot more family friendly and spent more time working on their characters to make them more likable. And the funny thing is that they abandon it for nothing. The vulgarness and the random acts of violence really don't add anything to the plot or to the characters or to the world around them. I feel like both of these shows suffer from something that is very common amongst streaming services. The fact is that these streaming services are at war with each other, not to make the best show, one with, deep characters, good plot lines. They're struggling and fighting against each other to make the most shows. Each company fights for any and all IPs so that they can grab on to any audience that might be attached to that. They're worried about making the most TV shows and movies and not the best TV shows and movies. Honestly, I challenge you, even though it's really a big waste of time, go on one of these streaming services and go to the original content and try to keep up with the schlock that they're producing nowadays. It's a full-time job. Even something like Star Wars on Disney Plus, I remember growing up as a kid, there was like 6 movies and I thought that was crazy. 6 movies, how am I going to keep up with all of this? And now there's like a new season every 6 months, and it's like 10 or 12 hours long. You have to dedicate so much time. You almost have to follow it religiously. And that is something that also plagues the other services, is that they're all just trying to copy Marvel. They're all just Disney Marvel clones. They produce so many shows that just have no value to them. They just feel like the same clothes but in different colors. But maybe I'm overreacting, and maybe Netflix will make The Three-Body Problem amazing, and it will revolutionize TV, revolutionize sci-fi, and it will be the best show ever. Let's take a look at some of the promotional material.
Oh, this is mental. This is...
In the Three-Body Problem book, the first time you enter into virtual reality is a moment of intense suspense and beauty. It's the first hint that we get of what is going on, and it's an important moment to establish the overall plot and mystery. And this is how Netflix decided to show that. So in conclusion, I fear that another sci-fi series I loved reading is going to get butchered and destroyed for the streaming wars. It's going to get turned into another Star of Thrones mush, and it's going to get removed of all its cool ideas and concepts, and then quickly abandoned for another franchise. And I'm releasing this before the show even comes out, so I might be completely wrong. And honestly, that's probably the only time I would enjoy being wrong, if the show does end up being great. I hope this video ages like milk then. I would love to see a proper adaptation of this book series with all of its ideas, technology, and concepts on the screen. This book series is not just influential amongst other novels, but it was actually influential on real science. The second book in the series, The Dark Forest, was named as a real theory in science afterwards, which I think is really cool. But even if someone doesn't do a play-by-play adaptation, changing it to be more character driven, sometimes that might be for the better too. Some movies and TV shows are better because they were changed a lot, but I don't think we're going to get that here. And as always, I would love to hear what you think. Maybe you loved the shows I mentioned for the exact reasons I didn't like them. Maybe you don't care. Maybe the fact that I spent this much time talking about something that is very trivial disgusts you. Or maybe you agree with me. Either way, I would love to hear it down in the comments below. And as always, thank you for watching. Godspeed.